Hello, this is Riley and Cody, and we're going to be talking about NSA and stuff like that. Okay, so as everyone knows, the government is watching us. Alright, so in particular, 4 months ago, a guy named Edward Snowden, he did some things on his computer, and he released 200,000 classified documents containing details and reports on mass surveillance programs by a couple countries, on people all over the world, and people in our own country. And he did this because he's against surveillance, and he's against anti-privacy programs such as the Patriot Act and all that stuff. And because of this, a bunch of right wing or a bunch of people have called Edward Snowden a bad guy, uh, made names to Edward Snowden, and he was actually incarcerated. He was charged with the 1917 Espionage Act, which is a law that was passed in World War I, so we could arrest a bunch of people that didn't like the war, but it still works today. Uh, so yeah, so a question comes up: was the government right in so a question comes up: is the government right in monitoring all these people? Is the Patriot Act right and all this stuff? But that leads to a bigger question: does society's right to knowledge precede the individual's right to knowledge? Now this question has two main perspectives, and that's an individual perspective and a social perspective. And when I say individual and social perspective, I don't mean like the perspective of a person, of an individual, or the perspective of everybody. I mean, the perspective of someone that believes that individual right to privacy is better, or is more is better than society's right to knowledge would be the individual perspective of it. Social perspective would be the perspective of someone that believes society's right to knowledge supersedes individuals' right to privacy. So each of these perspectives has their own beliefs and their own benefits of privacy. So we're going to go ahead and get down into the individual perspective, which again is the perspective that states that privacy is good, privacy is more important than society's right to knowledge. And this benefit, the biggest benefit of the individual perspective, is one specific point, and that is that privacy benefits the individual. And this is because it holds back sensitive or detrimental information from being released to the public, or being released to people that would that you would uh, that you would be detrimental to having them know. However, when you ask someone, if I were to ask Anderson why he likes privacy so much, it wouldn't be because it holds back sensitive and detrimental information. There'd be a lot of other reasonings, and this is because when people have a belief, they need a good justification for having it, and if they don't, then they're going to create one. Because if they don't have it, this is going to bring stress on them. Like, why do I believe this? So they're going to create this justification, and there's three main reasons that this justification is created, and that is emotional experience and something that I call is the Orwell effect. And also, privacy benefiting the individual. That's a selfish belief. That's a selfish benefit. So you're going to create a lot of these uh, alternative justifications and whatnot. So the emotional belief, or the emotional justification that comes from privacy, comes from two things, which is first is emotional attachment to ideas, ideals, or simply to words. This is prevalent in our society. It's the emotional attachment that we have to the Constitution, to liberty, freedom, pursuit of whatever, all that stuff. And the second emotional connection comes to just general fear, fear in one fear, and this fear comes from one thing, which is whenever it's possible for someone to lose something that is beneficial to them, they're going to be afraid of losing it, and they're going to be like being inclined to act out on this emotionally. Uh, and that's mainly what this fear is. It's the fear of losing this personal gain, the personal gain of privacy, or the personal benefit of privacy. And there's also fear in losing the justifications, but that's just another step, or that's just one step before losing your own personal gain. So both of these lead to personal distress and create a strong emotional reaction that support privacy. And again, we have emotional attachment to ideals and words that would support the ideals and words, such as the word privacy, that would support it. Also experience, our past experiences in our social life and our culture, uh, determines how we value privacy and the benefits of using privacy. So another justification that you'll commonly hear is is a social norm or kind of this common sense thing going on. So when you ask someone why they believe in privacy, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, it's in the Constitution, it's America, it's right, human rights, whatever. And this is be created because it's because it's extremely prevalent to ourselves. It's extremely prevalent in society. We have a lot of exposure to it, and this exposure creates a social norm, and it creates a common sense effect. Now, both these sound kind of similar, and they are similar, but they are different. So, a social norm is the values or the dominant beliefs of the society, and this affects the beliefs of privacy, mostly in when someone doesn't know all the information on privacy, how it's beneficial, how it's not beneficial, instead of actually going out and finding all this, because that can be challenging, they will instead either turn to their own belief, their own political religious belief, which is very common, or they will just turn to dominant belief. And that brings them the same amount of comfortability as actually going, finding this information and figuring it out yourself. And then the common sense effect, which is when someone actually goes out there and finds their own belief, and it's it violates the dominant social belief. And because of this, because it violates this dominant social belief, they instantly get ostracized in society. This belief instantly gets ostracized in society. So for instance, if I were to come in tomorrow, if I were to come go into, for instance, if someone were to say that privacy is bad, or someone were to say that privacy is bad, or someone were to say that someone were to say that privacy is bad, or something like that, then instead of actually convincing people to go out there and consider this alternative, they're just going to think, what are you talking about? Everyone believes against that. Therefore, it's common sense. Everyone knows that you're wrong, so I'm just going to ignore you. I'm going to ignore your opinion. Lastly, there's something called the Orwell effect, which is a pattern of reasoning, that leads to, well, which is a pattern of reasoning that leads to a lot of people being for privacy rights. Um, and this is a change. So this is the Orwell effect is a tendency for people to view the effects of an action or an event in a change. The Orwell effect is the tendency of someone to the Orwell effect is the tendency of someone to what the hell? The Orwell effect is the tendency of someone to view the effects of an action in a chain of events, and in the chain of events, and what is the effect of this action is dependent on what has happened previously. So to determine what's going to happen because of this, they're going to look back at history, back at what has happened, and they're just going to assume that it's going to be a chain of events and it's going to continue like this. So, for instance, when we're talking about privacy, they're going to say, hey, well, before, with the Nazis and with the Germans and with all that, and, before it starts with secret spying, they're spying secretly, then there's some regulations that say maybe there's there is an agency that goes around and, I don't know, invades your privacy a little bit before you get on an airplane or something, and then there's going to be public spying, where all of a sudden now we can have it publicly say we're spying on you, which is a big leap, a big step, which is a big leap, a big step in getting people used to it. Um, and this could be maybe there's some sort of um, act that states that we are looking at everyone's emails or something. And then it's going to go on to no freedom of speech, and then you got no freedom of thought, and then you got stuff. So, again, the Orwell effect is a tendency that people believe that the effects of an action are going to be representative of the effects of the actions before, and they're going to view this in a chain. And this happens because it's really easy to believe in this. People don't have to think. When you're trying to think of something, the effects of an action, it's kind of hard. You have to take in all these certain possibilities, all these factors that would influence this. You have to come up with one yourself, and that's really hard to do. It's also very stressful. Instead, you could just go back time and look at, well, what has happened before, what has happened previously, and they can just extend that. And that's easy for people. However, it's not the correct answer. Usually, there needs to be a lot more um, thought process that goes into that besides just what has happened previously. Also, it's easy to believe because people like consistency, and this is a form of consistency. If I were to, this is kind of a bad analogy, but if I were to drop my pen 10 times, and you see every time, if I were to drop a mysterious object that you've never seen before 10 times, and you see that every time I drop it, it hits the ground really fast, like it's heavy. However, one time I pick it up and I drop it, and it floats away like an airplane, like a piece of paper, that's a break in consistency. That's a break in consistency, and that's uncomfortable. People like it when the outcomes of an event are what they have expected. So when the outcomes of the event are what they have expected because of what has happened previously. So if there's a chain of events like the oral effect that I highlighted with these arrows, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot more consistent for it just to keep on going down and down until it gets to Stalin than for it to stop somewhere in the middle. Say we don't have freedom of speech, but we have freedom of thoughts. It's a lot more easy for it to keep on going down, and it's a lot more consistent and therefore a lot more comfortable. So these are kind of confusing, the emotional connections and the common belief, or the experience connections and the oral effect. This is all kind of confusing. So I decided to take all of this and put it into, so I decided to kind of show what all of this means in another way by taking it and putting it into another situation and explaining it. So the Tea Party versus Obamacare, that's my situation. Tea Party is a political group. If you could really call them a political group, I'd call them a group of people, political group, or a little more like just a group of people that's with a lot of other things are opposed to Obamacare. Obamacare is the Obama's care. Obamacare is Obama's care, his medical care. Obamacare is Obama's medical care. And the Tea Party is extremely opposed to this, and they're leading many rallies, many movements against this. So I went to the Tea Party's website, and I looked up Obamacare, and I kind of wrote down, I went to the Tea Party's website, wrote down Obamacare, and I brought forth what they have said on it. And here's a thing from the website, and I'm going to show the emotional, and I'm going to show why these people believe this. I'm going to show why these people believe this using these emotional justifications, experience, and the oral effect. So, first two lines start with the term "We the people," "Man, you destroy Obamacare now," and then "We the people." We the people. So repeat "We the people" twice. Now, "We the people" is obviously an allusion to the Constitution, which shows a strong emotional connection to the Constitution. And theory has it that the Constitution is opposed to Obamacare. Therefore, instead of actually going into Obamacare and why they're against Obamacare, they can just say, but what about the Constitution? Well, the Constitution is against Obamacare. So instead of actually going out there and finding that information out themselves, which is a lot more difficult, they can just directly involve themselves into the emotional connection of the Constitution, and how America is amazing. And then for experience, there is a term, big government is not the answer. Stop Obamacare now. Now, the big government is not the answer. If they were to actually go into why bigger government is not the answer, go into all that and justify it, support the claim, then this wouldn't be true, but they don't. They just say the government is not the answer, which is exploiting and using a common belief, which is exploiting and using the common knowledge or the common belief that Obamacare or that big government is not the answer. The social norm, the common belief that big government is not the answer. And lastly, there's a term, the socialist cabal, without a taste of the power of the Tea Party. So again, instead of saying Obamacare or Obama, they're now saying the socialist cabal. Whatever cabal is, doesn't matter. It's showing that the way they view Obamacare is a chain of reactions that's going to lead to trade products. So in concluding the personal benefits, all of these effects, all these justifications, the overall effect, emotional justification, experience, all of them are based on personal biases. All of them are based on keeping your own personal selfish bias of the benefits of privacy, keeping that, along with that, which, of course is which of course is detrimental, which of course brings to light the validity of these justifications, but also the emotional justification is based on emotions, which happen to be illogical, not based on reason, instead based on just how you believe in something, which is again personal bias. Um, these experiences, the social norm, and then the common sense. It's based on what society says is true, and society says is true. It's commonly not true, so it's not created by uh, a reasonable analysis of all these things. It's instead just based on what society says. And the moral role effect is based on illogical leaps of logic because we don't want to actually think about it. Instead, we just want an easy answer based on all that. So all of these experience, emotional justification, moral effect, therefore all of these are really quite crap. They're not valid in what they're saying they are because of all these adverse what they actually means, and they don't actually have any great benefits to anyone but yourself in the short term, but some small benefits to yourself in the short term. They don't have any benefits to society as a whole. Therefore, these should all be looked at as insignificant. However, back to the starting point, privacy being beneficial to the individual is still a valid point. So, when we're looking at the individual perspective, we should really be focusing on privacy being beneficial to the individual and not all these other, reasons. Anyway, so the social perspective, which is again society's right to knowledge, is good and it's better than individuals' right to privacy. This is based on the idea that society is more important than the individual because it's based on the idea that invading the privacy of the individual, while it may not be as beneficial to the individual, it's beneficial to all society in the long run. And this is due to increased protection, knowledge, public order, and a bunch of stuff can continue going on. And this is all based. The social perspective is based mostly on this idea. Unlike the individual perspective, it doesn't have a lot of other reasons. It's just based mostly on increasing, social or increasing society's benefits. It's utilitarian in this way that more numbers equal better. So, does society's right to knowledge supersede individuals' right to privacy? Well, this boils down to one thing: individual benefits, which is keeping sensitive information unknown, versus society's benefits. Or this boils down to the question: what's more valuable, the individual or society? So, if I were to answer this right now, I could say something like a blanket statement. So, if I were to answer this right now, instead of actually analyzing it, thinking about it, I could simply say a blanket statement, which is what a lot of people do. I can avert myself to my own beliefs instead of actually thinking about this and saying. However, this is going to be reductionist. And this is going to be an alternative to actually thinking about it. So, in order to come up with a more valid answer, investigation into multiple scenarios when this question comes up when needed.